The Nikon Z6 in 2024, ain't no one using that camera, but the Nikon Z6 III, now that's what's up. Wait, don't put that in. They can't know I'm still using the Z6. What's up, y'all? It's Project Photography back with another video, and today, last week I got this camera, the Nikon Z6 III, and man, this camera is just absolutely amazing. And as a landscape photographer, I did a shoot last week, and today I want to give you my first impressions. And one of my biggest takeaways of using the Nikon Z6 III is all these small, minor improvements that they made to this camera. But the fact that there's so many of them added up to a massive improvement when it comes to quality of life, especially for landscape photography. The first one is the fully articulating screen. Now, of course, as we all know, a fully articulating screen helps us see the camera when it's low to the ground in horizontal and vertical orientation. And some photographers may not like this. For me personally, I like it because we can see the camera in vertical orientation. But something amazing about this camera in vertical orientation in particular is the fact that the information moves into a vertical aspect. And now I love that because it doesn't make sense to have your camera in vertical orientation, but everything is oriented to be in horizontal orientation. That just doesn't make sense. So that is just something that is really minor, but makes a big difference when you're out there shooting landscape photography. And something that's really cool about this whole vertical orientation aspect is that it also applies when you're reviewing images. If you're reviewing an image and you have your camera in vertical orientation and it's a vertical photo, it will also orient that photo to be in vertical orientation. It will also orient the horizontal photos to be in vertical orientation. That just makes it so that you can see much more details and it covers up the entire screen. I think that's just such an amazing addition to this camera. Another aspect I really love is the fact that the horizon level actually takes up a much less portion of the screen. And that's really nice because on the previous Nikon Z6, if you remember, the horizon leveler was a big circle right in the middle of the screen, which makes it a little bit more difficult to see your composition. With the Z6 III, we do not have that issue because a horizon level is simply a nice line and it'll light up green if your horizon is level, and it'll also do that in vertical orientation as well. It just makes it so much easier to see your composition. The last major component of the LCD and the viewfinder is that we now have custom shooting displays. Now this is really nice because you can add in your histograms, your horizon level, and a bunch of other different features or elements that you want displayed on the back of the screen. I like to personally align my viewfinder and my back LCD so that they're both pretty much in the same order when it comes to adding in like the histogram or the horizon level. I think it just makes it so much more easier of an experience when you're cycling through and you know exactly what different shooting displays have. And another minor change they made to the Z6 III relative to the original Z6 is that they now have the release mode on the top left-hand corner. Now this is really nice because when you're shooting, you could be able to just like hold it down and then on the other hand, go ahead and move it to whatever release mode you want. But the other thing that I had just a minor gripe about the original Z6 is that when you were on the timer mode and then turned off your camera and turn it back on, it would go back to single shot. I don't know why that was ever a thing, but with the Z6 III, I tested this out. They are now able to have the timer mode, and when you turn it off and turn it back on, the timer mode is still there. Great job, Nikon. That's amazing. I don't know why this was such an issue before. This just makes the shooting experience overall much more pleasant because now I don't have to go back and continuously put myself into timer mode. I don't know why this was a big issue back with the Z6, but now it's corrected with the Z6 III. And the last minor feature that they added to the Z6 III is now linear focusing. So the system we had before is focus by wire, and it would dictate your focus position based off of how fast or slow you turned your focusing ring. For example, if you turn it very fast, it would go from 0 to infinity really quickly. Versus if you turn it really slowly, it would be very slow to change that focusing. However, with linear focusing, all that matters is the distance that you turn the ring. It doesn't matter how fast or slow you move it. Essentially, if you turn it 180 degrees one way and then 180 degrees the other, no matter how fast or slow you do it, it'll go back to the exact same focusing position. Now, this is really, really nice for landscape photography because majority of the time, like 99% of the time, we are manual focusing, and this allows us to get much more pinpoint accurate focus. It's especially important when we're almost in focus since we can be more precise when turning the focus ring slightly one way or another, since it's based off of the distance that the focus ring is turning. Even though all these small features may seem minor, they add up to a better experience overall. But in addition, Nikon also made this camera really ergonomically sound. And one of my favorite parts is the similarities between the Z6 III and the Z6. Obviously, this is part of the Z6 line, and we have a ton of similar controls to these regular Z6. First of all, the command dials, the button placements is extremely similar to the Z6. And I'm a huge fan of that, especially for me who has both a regular Z6 and a Z6 III. Moving between the two on shoot is just super seamless. I don't have to think about, okay, this button placements are here, this button placements are here for this camera, and I'm really glad that they kept a lot of the aspects similar. This also made adjusting to the new Z6 III a lot easier because, as you guys know, if you buy a new camera, you totally have to change how you think about the camera, or work around some of the different settings that may have not been available. But I'm just glad that they kept everything the same, and it made it just so much easier to set up this camera the way I like it. Very similar to how I set up my Z6. But even though the command dials and the button placements are pretty much identical to the original Z6, they did make this camera heavier and slightly larger than the original Z6. When it comes to weight, the Z6 III is coming in at 750 grams relative to 667 grams of the original Z6. Now, when you're holding it, you can honestly tell the difference when it comes to the weight. It does feel a bit heavier, but when you're putting it in your bag, not really gonna make a huge difference, especially when you have other things in your camera bag. But this camera is also taller, lengthier, and just a bit bulkier overall than the Z6. One aspect that I think it does a really good job in is actually with the grip. This grip is better than the Z6. Because this camera is a little bit larger in terms of its length, it just gives you a lot more room to be able to place your hand on it much more comfortably. It also contours to your hand extremely well, and one of my other big issues with the Z6 is the fact that when you hold it, your pinky finger kind of falls off, but with the Z6 III, it is tall enough to be able to support your pinky finger, which honestly might sound really dumb, but I promise you, when you're shooting with it, it does make a big deal. And normally I'm a proponent of smaller is always better, but in this case, I'm actually really glad with the size improvements of the Z6 III. Ergonomically is just better than the original Z6. And I feel like the Z6 still has its place in my bag because it's smaller, more lightweight, more compact. I can bring it in those situations where I want to have something that's a lot smaller. So I think they both have their different places. So great job, Nikon, when it comes to ergonomics. All the changes you made has made this camera a much better camera ergonomically over the original Z6. But there is one feature that I'm really glad Nikon brought to the Z6 III. Achoo! Oh, excuse me, but pixel shift is that feature. And one thing that I was really excited about was seeing that this feature was going to be implemented into this camera. Because as you know, we have a 24 megapixel sensor in here, but as Nikon advertised, it does go up to 96 megapixels. So essentially how it works is that there's 4 different modes. There's a 4, 8, 16, and 32. And as you increase those shots, the better dynamic range you will get. But here's the thing, with the 4 and the 8, you only get a 24 megapixel image, which was a little disappointing to me. I kind of wish that you could have an option like a 45 megapixel image. But with the 16 and the 32, we are going to get that 96 megapixel images. This is amazing and totally scratches that itch for wanting a higher megapixel camera. But something to keep in mind is that when you are using these pixel shift modes, you are taking a lot of images. I mean, especially with the 32 mode, yes, that will give you the most dynamic range and that 96 megapixel file, but 32 images is a lot of card space on your camera, and these are full raw images. And when I was compiling them into the Nikon software, I forgot what it's called, I think it's NX Studio, it essentially will come out with about a 515 megabyte photo. Now, that is a lot, and I don't know how digestible it is when you're shooting for a longer period of time. So that's why, for me, I'm gonna be really particular when I am using the pixel shift mode. And I think that's a big reason why I would probably prefer using the 16 shot mode over the 32. Yes, we're gonna see an increase in dynamic range with the 32, but with the 16 shot mode, you really are getting the best of both worlds. You're still getting incredible dynamic range, but you really are gonna be able to get that 96 megapixel image. But with the 4 and the 8, I just don't know how often I'm gonna use that mode. I really wanna do a deep dive comparison, comparing those modes to something like HDRs, because with HDRs, that's the mode I normally use when I wanna increase my dynamic range. And just like with pixel shift mode, you're really not gonna be using it when subject matters are moving. This is definitely something I wanna test out a lot more, especially before my full review, but I also want to do a video where I'm kind of deep diving into the pixel shift mode because I think this is just an incredibly important feature, especially for landscape photographers. But when it comes to the overall image quality of the Nikon Z6 III, It's something that I need to test out more and something I will be detailing very heavily in my full review. Because last shoot, I was mainly shooting HDRs and pixel shifting because that's what I wanted to shoot most of. But honestly, I have to test things out like electronic shutter, mechanical shutter, dynamic range, also it versus the Z6. But in this first shoot is when I realized that these small features really do add up to make a big improvement of the camera overall. Individually, these features may not seem like a big deal, but I think when you add them all together, it really makes the landscape photography experience just so much better. And on paper, the Nikon Z6 III may not seem like the perfect landscape camera because of course you'd want the better dynamic range with the higher megapixel sensor or a lower base ISO. But I really feel like this camera does a great job in terms of capturing those landscapes. It takes the thinking out of me capturing them. I don't have to worry about, oh, the horizon level is too big for the screen, I can't see my composition. The Z6 III takes the thinking out of me having to worry about my camera body and all these little things that I wish it had, because it has them. And so I can really just focus on the surrounding areas around me when it comes to capturing landscape photography and just focus on building a composition and capturing the best image possible. And at the end of the day, isn't that why you get and upgrade your camera body? So I'm really glad that I skipped the Nikon Z6 II because the Z6 III over the original Z6 is just such a massive improvement. I waited 5 years for this and I'm really glad I did. But anyways guys, if you guys have any questions about the Nikon Z6 III, please feel free to leave it in the comment section down below. I'd be more than happy to answer your questions or include that question into my review when I go ahead and make that. And that review is going to be coming in about 2 weeks, give or take, because next week I want to make my Nikon 28-400 review that I've been kind of pushing off because the Z6 III came out, but we're going to go ahead and make that review soon. But yeah guys, let me know what you think about the Nikon Z6 III down in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for experiencing the world with me today, and please feel free to rate, comment, subscribe. I'll catch you guys in the next one.